and welcome to this Fane online event. My name is Adra Darko, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you for what promises to be a powerful, deeply relevant, and perhaps a little bit chaotic conversation. I am joined by the wonderful Stephanie Yeboah, body image advocate, multi-award winning content creator, and now debut novelist.
Hey.
Here
Oh,
to whoa,
thank
here to
you.
introduce her phenomenal romantic comedy, Chaotic Energy. Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, my love. I am so happy to be doing this event with you. Thank you so much for this. This is going to be a really great conversation, and I just cannot wait to dive in with you.
It's really my pleasure. Like, there's so much that I want to talk to you about, so much that I want to explore with you, and just really just kind of get into it with this book and this journey and this new avenue for you, really. So then let's just get into it. I think it would be great for you to kind of give us a quick intro, no spoilers,
Mhm.
about chaotic energy. What is chaotic energy all about?
Okay, so Chaotic Energy is a rom-com novel that is essentially based on the concept of catfishing and doing whatever it is possible to feel a sense of desirability. So it's about this young woman based in South London.
South London represent.
London represent, she is this plus size Black woman called Artemis, and she is just a happy go lucky, very successful at work. She's has great friends, she's got great family, she's an all-round really joyful, lovable character, but the only area that she's lacking is her dating life. She just can't, for love nor money, she just can't seem to get it together because the men out here are just very trash. They're very trash. And she is somebody that also, alongside her work, she also has an Instagram where she loves to talk about house plants. I mean, I don't know where she got that inspiration from. And she loves talking about house plants. So she has an Instagram page that is dedicated to house care tips, house plant tips. And so one day she gets a cheeky DM from somebody in the States asking for advice on how to look after his plant. So naturally, she goes onto this guy's Instagram and has a look and says, you know what, this guy's a bit of me. He's very gorgeous. And they start talking, and bearing in mind this is her plants brand Instagram account, so she doesn't have any photos of herself. And so they develop a really cool friendship, and then after a while the guy says, hey, it would be great to know what you look like. And in a moment of sheer panic, she decides to send him a picture of someone else, thus starting this odyssey of deceit and chaos as they begin to grow closer. And yeah, it just descends into chaos from there on.
So much, Stephanie. And like as your fiction debut, I mean, you've been writing for years, like journalism, essays, of course, Fattily Ever After. What was the shift like from non-fiction into fiction for you? Like, what has really surprised you about this new endeavor?
So for me, I think the biggest thing for me from going from nonfiction to fiction is that I had to use my brain a lot. I was like, I mean, generally we use our brains when we write, but with this
Mm.
one, it was like the imagination had to be on 10. I was like I have to now think of characters, and then I have to think of dialogue, and then I have to
Mm.
think of, and I was just like, I was very overwhelmed at first, and there was a lot of imposter syndrome because I was like, okay, I knew the basic values of the book. I knew that I definitely wanted to write a book based off of catfishing because there aren't any books or any
Mm.
that deal with catfishing as a concept. And I can understand why it's quite difficult to write around because the
Yeah.
majority of the incident that would be happening is going to be via text and via phone. And so you have to come up with creative ways to ensure that the plot stays realistic, especially in
Mhm.
this day and age when it's so easy to find out if someone's catfishing. Whereas before, in the early 2000s, it was a bit more difficult. So it was difficult trying to come up with ways to kind of keep the dialogue fresh and funny and informative,
Mm.
all of these kinds of things. Whereas with nonfiction, it was very much about the facts and it was very much about writing academic pieces. It
Mm.
was, the interviewing people and research, all of these things have already been written by other people. So it was just me, doing research and coming up with my own interpretations and perspectives on things that are already out there. So I find nonfiction a lot easier to write. So with this one, it was like everything is 100% coming from me. And
Mm.
yeah, there was a lot of writer's block in the first few months where I was like, oh, I don't think I can do this. And, at university, I never had to write a dissertation. We just did exams. So this was
Mhm.
the first time writing a very large body of work. And I think after I got over the first few months of feeling slightly overwhelmed and I was able to write a chapter plan, I think that's when it got a bit easier for me.
Mm. And I think you've already kind of alluded to it, especially with the houseplants behind you.
Yeah.
But how much of chaotic energy is autobiographical? Like, do you feel like you've drawn upon your own personal experiences, especially with regards to dating, and kind of your own chaotic moments slash decisions?
Girl, how much is autobiographical, boy? So it's Artemis is a plus size black girl from South London,
Yes, she
which
is.
I am. And she's Ghanaian, which
Oh.
we are. She loves houseplants. Her dating is what I will say about Artemis, though, is that she has a level of confidence which I didn't have at that
Okay.
age. And I think that's something that when I was going into writing her, I really wanted her to be confident from the get-go. I
Mhm.
know that she does have that chaotic moment where she panics and then does what she does. But outside of that, generally, she's very, very confident. I wrote her to specifically be like a size 26 and,
Mhm.
very just very full of herself in a non sort of vain way. But, she loves fashion. She loves taking up space. And so I think in my early sort of 20s and mid 20s, I was still struggling with those, with trying to show up authentically and unapologetically in my skin. And I really wanted her to be just this fully fledged, amazing, fashionable, great character. And so I would say I'm now more a bit of her now than I was sort of,
Yeah.
a few years ago. With regards to dating, again, exactly the same, just a horrible day after horrible day, especially when it comes to the fat fetishes.
Oof.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Oof.
I had to write some of that in terms of the transatlantic love situation, or is there a love or love situation? Yes, that's also kind of like stems from me and my partner who is from California. But the actual interaction between them both, that's not based on us, just in terms of like the distance and the logistics. I thought it would be cool to have him in another country. And then also just the actual concept of the catfishing story does come from my past. So I was catfished when I was 16, 17 on MySpace for 3 years by somebody in California. And I should have known, we didn't have the tools to detect, when someone was a catfish. And to be honest, I should have known the man or the guy was a catfish because he said his name was Romeo and he was born on Valentine's Day. Now, at the time, it didn't really, I was just like, oh my God, this is a romantic babe. Like the stars are
Thank goodness for discernment. Thank goodness for growth.
as in.
Yes.
I remember
Mhm.
I bought a plane ticket to go and see this man like 3 weeks before I found out he was a catfish. Like I found out 3 weeks before, but I had already bought the ticket. I couldn't refund it. And and then that was something that stayed with me for a very long time because I felt
Mhm.
like I had grown to fall in love with this guy. Like we were talking every day and he was sending me photos and videos. Come to find out, he was ripping them from YouTube and SoundCloud. The investigation that I did was about 6 months worth. Me and my best
What?
friend investigated. And then we ended up finding out that the actual person who it was went to Hertfordshire Uni. And yeah, he went to Hartford. I'm not even going to say his name because he follows me on Twitter and he knows exactly who he is.
Does he
And
know that you know?
he doesn't know that I know, no. He doesn't know that I know. At some point, I'm going to confront him. But when I found out, because he sent me a picture that at this point now we could do the Google image reverse. And
Yeah.
because he was a friend of mine on Facebook, um, it came up as his picture on Facebook. Like it was like a close up of a sleeve tattoo, and it was his sleeve. And I was like, oh, so it was this guy.
Really, you.
Yeah, but to this day he doesn't know. But at some point I am gonna confront him with it. I just found it because at this point now I don't care. But back then, oh, I was heartbroken. And
It's great that you've managed to take that inspiration and
mm,
use that as a plot device, like
yeah,
within the novel. And like, of course, like Thames, as you've kind of already spoken about, like Thames's deception, like the choice to be deceiving is like
mm,
so pivotal to like the story. And really I wanted to kind of ask, like, what are you exploring there? Like what are you saying here about identity,
mm.
self-perception, and kind of curating an online image about oneself, especially as a plus size Black woman?
Yeah, so what I intentionally kind of went out of my way to write Artemis as almost like an unreliable narrator. So I think
Mm.
from that aspect, because sometimes when it comes to rom-coms, I'm so this may sound very pessimistic of me. I'm just so and I get so frustrated with the main protagonist always being, this lovable, happy-go-lucky, but unfortunate in love. Like they're always so nice,
Mm.
everybody's nice. And I'm just like, this is sending the message that only nice people get to fall in love. And that is not the case.
Mm.
Some people would be doing up a big mess up. Some people, make decisions that impact other people through no intentional fault of their own. Sometimes we do things that we think in the moment is good for us, but actually has negative effects on others. And for me, it's just like, not everybody is perfect. Like you can make mistakes but still be,
Mm.
you still have the right to be able to fall in love and to fix those mistakes as well. And I think for Artemis, yeah, I wanted her to be chaotic. I wanted you to have this illusion of this woman who seemingly has it all together, but in a moment of this quick snap sort of insecurity, she decides to do like one of the worst things imaginable. And I think for me, it's something that really resonated with me, especially when I was younger and I hadn't discovered the body positivity or the fat acceptance community. So I was still struggling with a lot of body image issues. And on the front of it, I would go out and I would seemingly come across as confident, but there were times, especially during like MySpace times, like when I was a teenager, where I would often think, oh, I want to create a profile and just put the photo of like a mixed race, small hourglass shaped woman and just see what the reaction is like. Because with Artemis, yes, she's confident, but she also wants love. And she is aware that it's not that she doesn't like herself, but she's also very aware that she's in a situation, she's in a society where unfortunately body shapes like hers don't receive the love that she deserves. And
Mm.
and it's like that thing where we were talking about where you can't self-love your way out of a fat phobic society, out of a systemically, fat phobic society that often calls to put fat women down. And so I think she's very aware of that. And despite that, she still goes out of her way to, put on her glad rags and she still wants to go out and try and date. But she's also just conscious that she is in a society where people are often judging her for her weight. And I think when it comes to seeing Ruben, who is the person that contacts her, and she sees this guy and he's like her perfect guy, like, oh my gosh, he's like this super attractive guy, but then also he's in America, so even if I do catfish him, it's not like anything's going to come of it. Which, well, things go quickly turn left. But yeah, I think it's kind of like a nod to the society that we're in at the moment, especially being plus size, Black women being very visible online and just knowing that even if we appear online and we don't say a word, everything about us is just deemed political, from
Mm-hmm.
afro to being dark skinned to being
Mm-hmm.
apt and being visible and using our voices. It's seen as a political act. And so I wanted to write Artemis for those of us to feel seen, those of us who have never seen ourselves in a rom-com as the center, the centered love interest. I wanted us to feel seen, and I wanted us to kind of realize that we can show up in love stories and not be the sassy best friend, and
Oof.
we can show up in love stories and not have to lose loads of weight
Mm-hmm.
in order to be loved. And I think even in with this book, there's even a point where she puts on more weight and she doesn't care. Like she's just like, oh, this is, extra weight. I don't really care kind of thing. And and again, that was very intentional because I'm so tired of rom-com sort of doing this thing with fatness where it's like we only exist to fuel the skinny protagonist, or we only exist to provide comic relief or to be the help. And it's just like we are worthy and deserving of love and attraction and
Mm.
sexuality without it being fetishized.
There's so many threads from what you just said that I want to pull on.
Mm-hmm.
So many. I really hear you with regards to even just when we think about rom-coms, we really think about them being essentially a slim white woman's game. And so, as you said, it's so powerful to see a confident, plus size and like visibly plus size as well, and like on a further along in the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
plus size woman leading a rom-com, and it's not about comic relief, it's not about her being the sidekick, but really as the romantic center. And so just wanted to ask really about like how do you feel chaotic energy is subverting or also fitting into the rom-com canon?
I think with chaotic energy, I think it just brings a whole. So for me, again, with chaotic energy, I wanted to kind of flip the roles. So you've got Artemis and, one of her best friends, Aneni, who is just this sort of Instagram model, very
Mm-hmm.
gorgeous, very rich, very annoying. She's just she's the character who you would think would be the main character. And I intentionally
Mm-hmm.
and Neni as like the side, almost like a sidekick character, like she's kind of on the sidelines. Her and Artemis have a very fraught, tense relationship, even though there's a lot of love there, but there is a very interesting relationship dynamic within between them, and you come to find out sort of at the crescendo of the book that Aneni has had specific feelings about Artemis, which I think when you kind of realize why their relationship is so tense, it's just
Mm-hmm.
really, I think it's a really interesting kind of dynamic. And I think with chaotic energy, I really wanted friendship to be like a really strong pillar there as well, because again I've written her as slightly unreliable. I even think that's quite an interesting thing, because with a lot of rom-coms they tend to be quite reliable, like they are written for the reader to automatically be drawn in and to find amazing things about this character, to sympathize with this character, to kind of find out, why isn't this character able to find love, or why is she arguing with this person? Whereas with Artemis, it's like there's a bit of contention there. I didn't want audiences to not like her, but I wanted her to be realistic. And I think for me, that was the most important thing. I wanted her to be flawed, to be
Yes.
a flawed character, because that is, symbiotic of real life, is that all of us are flawed in some way, shape, or form. And it kind of feeds into this thought of being the perfect love interest. Sometimes, like for me growing up, I actually really hated rom-coms. I never
Mm.
I never really read the books. I never watched rom-com movies because it always felt as if there had to be a perfect character or a perfect love interest, and that was never somebody that looked like me. That was never I just couldn't relate to any of these characters because, like you said earlier, they're always slim, white, pretty women, or slim white women who then got rid of their glasses or
Yeah.
dyed their hair,
Or
and then
their
suddenly,
braces.
yeah,
Yeah.
and suddenly they're
Yeah.
like amazing, and it was
Oh,
like,
wow. Yes.
yeah, it's like I don't see myself in any of this, and after a
Mm.
while, it almost kind of taught me that, well, in order to find love you have to look like these women, or only
Mm.
slim women are capable of love, or only a
Deserving.
certain type of woman. And so for me it was just like, well, then if that's the case, if that's what the media is trying to tell me, and if that is kind of echoing what society is trying to say, well, maybe then I'm not deserving of love. Maybe I don't deserve love because of this flaw that I have, which is being fat or being dark skinned or whatever the case may be. Like, I didn't want to see that as a flaw, but society and the media were feeding these messages that almost made me feel like existing in the body that I was in was a flaw, um, which made me not worthy of being loved. And obviously now I've grown out of that. By the grace of God, we've grown out of that.
Amen.
You know what I mean? Amen. We've grown out of that. But it kind of feeds into me wanting, again, centering Artemis as a larger plus size, Black woman, and her actually being the center of attention, being the one that her friends, regardless of their reasons or regardless of whatever, beef they might have with each other, they all look up to her. Like, they all see her as this amazing person, regardless of what the everything around her, her dates or whatever, see as
Mm.
flaws. And so, yeah, I wanted her to be very unapologetic in all of the things that make her different. And I think that is something that has been missing from the rom-com genre for a while, I think.
But did you feel pressure with regards to this representation? Because bearing in mind that we so rarely see ourselves,
Mm.
women who look like us, in
Mm.
these positions, did you feel a specific type of pressure that comes with this representation where you felt like, I think often the problem is, and what we're really getting into is that Black women are like
Mm.
never afforded the same freedom to be messy or chaotic as our white counterparts in media.
Mm.
And so, with that in mind, did you feel that sense of pressure when you were writing Artemis?
Do you know what? I don't, I think the only area that I felt a bit of pressure was when I was writing her and I was thinking, should I make her as chaotic? But I feel like that was background
Mm,
noise that was telling me, like, well, you have to write her so that she's more mainstream, aka
yeah.
appeals to white readers.
Hmm.
And I was just like, well, no, because I'm actually writing it for us. Like, I'm writing
Mm,
it for plus size Black women as well, because predominantly I want it to be, regardless of, whether the book becomes a bestseller or not, I focused on writing this book specifically for Black plus size women and for Black plus size women to feel seen. So whether it does well or not, for me it doesn't matter, because I want there to be a piece of literature out there in the world where, you get like a 15, 16-year-old, plus size woman getting to read, these funny, chaotic stories that feature her as, this as the love interest. And so for me, I intentionally, like, I didn't feel the pressure to make her, bigger. I didn't feel the pressure to kind of, to make her a bit chaotic, or to make her quite, because even at work, she has quite a presence at work. She's a
mm,
big authority figure, and she likes to make her voice heard and things. And I didn't want to kind of conform to making her small in order to make white readers feel safe around Artemis.
mm,
I wanted her to put her in and be like, yeah, this is her. She takes up space. She's confident in her skin. She's fat, and she uses the word fat. And I really wanted her to kind of be able to stand on her own as a character that people can look up to, and eventually people can just see the humanity in us as well. Because I think sometimes we are we are fetishized so much and dehumanized so much as Black women, as fat Black women, that people begin to see us as a monolith, or
mhm,
like, oh, we're either like the mammies, or we're just
mm,
hypersexual and aggressive. And it's just like, no, we can also be soft. We can also
Yes.
be successful. We can also have great friends. We can also mess up at times.
Mm.
We can also do things that may hurt others, but ultimately we're doing it because we want to be loved. We're not doing it maliciously or to hurt people, but sometimes the mistakes that we make can be fueled by insecurity, can be fueled by maybe the unhealed part of us that just needs a bit more time and a bit more pouring into,
And hug.
you know? Yeah. So I was very intentional with Artemis. I wanted her to be, yeah, a fully well-rounded, no pun intended, like individual.
Comes across so strongly. And even as you were speaking, I was thinking about that point around her self-describing herself as fat, and
Mm-hmm.
how rarely it is that we read a novel, read and actually consume any form of kind of mainstream media and see a woman calling herself as fat, but as a just neutral descriptor, as opposed to it being a, a source of insecurity and pain for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even as you said, like Thames is so well rounded. She's also doing well, you know, on so many of the kind of tick boxes that it is adulthood. Like she's thriving in her career, she's got her strong online presence, but you also see that in amongst the confidence, there's obviously moments of deep insecurity and moments that happen in the novel where it's very reflective of the experience of being like a plus size Black woman, especially when you're navigating dating. So why did you think it was important to kind of show, but I think you've spoken about it a bit, but it'd be great to hear more about like, why did you feel like it was important to show that duality?
So for me, it was important because people need to know that dating when you're plus size, I'm sorry, it's very rubbish. And people need to know this because one thing, when I was dating, one thing that annoyed me.
She said past tense. Wow. Wow. Cannot
sometimes,
relate. Cannot
sometimes
relate. Cannot relate. Cannot relate.
listen, sometimes it can still be very annoying, but like there's this thing where like if we're complaining or if we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, dating being plus size, it's a minefield. Like we have to deal with misogynoir, we have to deal with
Mm-hmm.
phobia, we have to deal with
Mm-hmm.
the fetishization
The
and
chubby
the
chasers.
chubby chasers. And then somebody who's often slim will come along and say, oh, but that's happening to everyone. Listen, I don't want to hear that.
Everybody goes through it, babe. Everybody goes through it.
Everybody goes through it. That's what
Uh,
I'm just like, no, but I'm talking about a specific kind of systemic fuckery
mhm.
that's going on
Yeah, that's
that
it.
only really affects us. That's what I want to get into.
Mhm.
And I wanted to bring a little bit of that into the story because again, it's just again, it not only is it reflected in the dating that I've been a part of, but also it's just for some people it is part and parcel of the dating sphere. And I do
Mhm.
want people that may not be fat who are reading it to kind of be like, oh damn, like I didn't know that this was happening and that was happening and that's not right and that's really horrible. And I do think it is important for us to be able to share stories of the ways in which plus size women are treated in dating. So as well as Artemis, living her life and having the highs, and in this book, she's often talking about her fashion sense and all of the great things that come along with her. Also in the book, learning to love her body. I also wanted to put some of the challenges that she has to face, living in a fat body, not because she hates it, but because of how society is trying to make her feel. And for me, yeah, it was me trying to kind of just make her relatable, just a regular South London babe that goes through, all of these trials and tribulations that we have to go through, on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. I wanted to kind of bring that realism into it.
Mm. So you said society. So
Mm,
let's talk about society.
mm.
Let's talk about body positivity and where we are now. So Steph, I have to give you your flowers because for me,
Oh.
you were the voice. Oh, not a word, not past tense, but I think thinking about the kind of body movement,
Mm,
mainstream body positive movement of like, let's say about 10 or so years ago on words for they say, yeah, during the Renaissance, the high times, whatever we want to call it, of body positivity, it feels like you were really a leading voice when it came to the discourse. But I don't know if it's just me. If it's just me, but we're
No.
definitely seeing a shift. Like Finn is definitely back in.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ozempic is everywhere. But I think more than that, it's really about how the discourse now seems eerily reminiscent of how it used to be in the early noughties. And I just wanted to ask, like, how are you feeling about this cultural whiplash, this backlash that we're in? And where do we go from here?
It's incredibly disappointing. I don't even like to associate myself with the body positive movement anymore because I think with the movement, it was dependent on it being a safe space for fat women to be in community with each other, share resources, talk about our experiences, you know, whether it's reaching out to brands, whether it's just telling our stories, sharing our truths, and just having a safe space for us to be in community with each other. And I think as soon as it became monetized, as soon as it hit the mainstream and brands started to see, oh, look, we've got influencers and models that are also showing off outfits and stuff, which is all great. But once they started to commodify it, it then became that thing where it was like, okay, well, we want people to love themselves, but these people are a little bit too fat. So we're going to bring in the mid-size. We're going to bring in the sexy fats. We're going to bring in the hourglass fats and the light-skinned and white fats. And so it started to get diluted and only started to show a certain type of fat body, which was often hourglass shape or exaggerated hourglass shape, small bellies, big bums, you know, those kinds of body types. And so for me, that was where I started to just be like, yeah, I can't really associate with this anymore. I don't feel like I'm and people that look like me are visible. And when I started noticing that there was a trend, there was a standard of beauty in the body positivity movement. That's when I was like, this is actually insane. The whole point of there being a body positive movement is that there should not be a standard of beauty. Now you had people losing weight in order to be hourglass shaped. You had people losing weight in order to be considered smaller so that they could work with specific brands who claim to be body positive but only stopped at a size 22. And for me, I was like, drop me out, don't want to be a part of it anymore. It doesn't represent us. And then I think the turning point, so that was kind of like your 2017 onwards. But then for me, I think where we really saw it change was during lockdown. Because what happened was you had loads of slimmer women who then suddenly put on a lot of weight because everybody was at home. And then they didn't know how to dress for their new bodies. So then you had a lot of women who were between the sizes of 12, like size 12 to 16, making content on, you know, if you've put on a bit of weight, how to dress for your bigger body. That's absolutely fine. If you're keeping it to fashion, great. But then what happened is I think brands, again, started to see this and then they started to use these models and influencers who were between a size 12 to 16 as body positive experts. And then we began to see a lot of women who were between a size 12 to 16 or a 12 to 18 suddenly taking up space of those who were a size 24, 26 onwards. And then coupled with that, Ozempic came into town, child. And now it's become a lot more accessible. And we have now just regressed back into 90s style fat phobia. And I think for me, when it comes to these semaglutides and injections, I think where I really have an issue with it is when people who are already small abuse it. So we all know that, you know, these things are meant for people either who have diabetes or people that may just want to lose a bit of weight for whatever reason. And for me, I've never really had an issue with that at all. I think where it's difficult for me is where you have people that might, like somebody might be a size 16 and they might start using it. But I know that through research for writing articles about it, I know that there's a certain BMI you have to be in order to use these Ozempics and stuff. And a lot of people are cheating the system because now it's so easy to get. You know, I've seen things where people have gone onto message boards and they've asked other members on the message boards who are plus size to be like, send me your weight on a scale so that I can get this prescription. And so it's the abuse of it that I think I have an issue with. There's a lot to be said about the plus size community and the shrinkage of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting one, which I think we could have a whole conversation about, because as somebody, you know, who has lost a bit of weight over the last 3-4 years as well, it's a funny one for me to comment on, because on one hand, I find it disappointing that all of us seem to be losing weight at the same time. I find it really disappointing, and I have thoughts, but then also it also feels like I'm a part of that, even though it's not through the use of the weight loss drugs or anything like that. It's just going to the gym and stuff. But I also feel like I can't really talk on certain things anymore, which is fine, because I'm always happy to. One thing I think about the body positive community that actually has really annoyed me is that even when you do get smaller sized people, instead of highlighting or referencing larger voices, they tend to center themselves.
Yes.
And they tend to make it all about, oh, look at me in my size 16 to 18 body, and I'm going to talk about, you know, the pressures of being in a larger body and the systemic this, that, and the other. And it's like, but it's not affecting you as much as it's affecting somebody that's a size 26 to 28. So why don't you use that campaign that you've been given and pass it to somebody who's able to talk about their experiences being a size 26 to 28? But a lot of people tend to want to clutch onto that and center themselves. And when you do that, you're centering the bodies of size 12 to 16s. And for me, I'm not about that life. Like, I'm very much like, okay, now that I'm a bit smaller, I'm very happy to send brands and things, names of people I know who are amazing, who are, you know, size 24, 26, 28, because I can't take up that space anymore. I can still talk about it and be an ally and root for it and always will, but I think the demise in the community is really down to smaller bodies centering themselves in a community that was always meant for larger fat women and larger fat Black women.
Black women too.
That's something that's
Erased.
often underlooked, is that the community was created at first by plus size Black women, and it's just kind of disappeared. But I'm hoping that we can have a bit of a resurgence. I don't know. I don't know how that could potentially be, because again, you have the weight loss injections that are so easily accessible. But I do have faith in Gen Z. Like, we have to. I say we, like, I'm a millennial, but
the children of the future.
Children of the future. I'm hoping that they, you know, the TikTokers, they really sort of come through and strong with body positivity in future.
I really do hear you. And I think it's difficult because many of us have lost weight. But I do think that there is something to be said about not begrudging our sisters. I think, as we talked about in terms of like that point around, you can't self-love yourself out of oppression. And it's complex as to the reasons and the choices that people decide to do with their body.
Absolutely.
That being said, I do think that what is disappointing about where we're at in the movement is essentially that a lot of the kind of heavy hitters, pardon the pun, of our kind of plus size influencers, upon losing weight, have kind of lost their sense of self within the community and the responsibility that they've had to so many of us, and what it's meant for so many of us to see people who look like them occupying such spaces. And what I say by that is that there's a lot of before and after pictures going on. There's a lot of strong diet culture being pushed on people who didn't follow you or give you that support or give you that even financial support for this. And so I do think there is a responsibility that comes with being a plus size influencer, which is difficult. And perhaps it is parasocial. And perhaps people are all tapped and we should really just let people do whatever they want to do. But that being said, it is difficult that I think, even going to your earlier point, I think the failure of the body positivity movement is rooted in the fact that it was about we're pretty too, as
Mm,
opposed to we deserve fundamental human rights. And I
mm,
think that is where things went wrong. You
mm.
know, this was about I too should be on the front of this because I too am attractive, or, I look good too, as opposed to saying that we deserve more. And that is where I think that is the inevitable conclusion is where we are at now.
That, I mean, hey, you've just hit it on the head. I think when it comes to, I think that is where my frustrations lie, is that it's not even necessarily about the weight loss. It is about what
Mm,
you're doing with that. It is about the way in
yeah,
which you are showing that to your audience. If you have built your platform based on, talking about your experiences, advocating for the visibility of fat women online, whether it's through speaking to brands about extending their clothing ranges, or just
mm,
trying to help with visibility in any way. What has been disappointing for me, oh my gosh, the before and after things, I can't fathom it. And it's the way in which some people have started to talk about fatness in a way that
yeah,
is incredibly fat phobic.
yeah.
It's just really disappointing, because you can be a fat person that has lost weight, but you still advocate for fat bodies. You still,
100%.
you still want to have those. These are the things that you've built your platform on. Your foundation is to try and
Mhm.
advocate for fat bodies. So I don't understand why that has to change once you've lost weight.
Definitely.
Do you still not believe in those things? So with me, it's like, even when reaching out to brands, I'm always like, can this go up to a size 28? Can this go up to
Mhm.
this? And, if you're somebody that deals a lot in clothes and things, and you're trying to source clothing or clothing edits for your customers, just because you're a size 16 now, it doesn't mean that you stop looking for brands that go up to a size 28 or a 30.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
your point to when you were saying about it's just become about I want to access desirability too.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. And it is, don't get me wrong, like wanting to be desired is a big thing. It's something that a lot of us have not really been able to feel in the public sphere. So having that is also a little bit important, but advocating for the rights of fat people, from literature to the way that we're perceived in media, to the workplace, the ways that we're treated, to healthcare, to mental health. There are so many different facets of the ways in which fat phobia affects fat people outside of desirability alone. And it's just annoying that a lot of people have just focused and zeroed in on just desirability and wanting
Mhm.
to be seen and wanting to be perceived, because there's so much more. So oh, I definitely agree with you on that thing. And I think that's what's kind of been disappointing for me, is that as soon as the weight has gone, the internalized fat phobia has come up with the before and after,
Mhm.
with the, oh, when I was fatter, I was pretending to be confident, but actually deep down I hated myself. And it's just
And
like,
everything about me was awful, and I didn't want to go outside, and everything was just
yeah,
terrible, and I was in the trenches. But now I've lost a few sizes, and I'm 1,000,000%, and my life is so much better. You
yeah.
know?
Like, babe, do you know what you're saying? Do you know what this is
Yeah.
to? And so, yeah, for me, it's that's the crux. That's the issue for me. I mean, again, body autonomy is everything. You do whatever you
Mhm.
lose weight for whatever reasons. But if you have built your platform specifically on wanting to advocate for fat bodies, which is something we still need, then don't kind of, you know, when you do lose the weight, still try and maintain that integrity,
Mhm.
So yeah, child. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about your choice of Thames's career, and
Mhm.
whether that was kind of like a direct message to everything that you've just said about kind of the fashion industry, the media, etc.
Yes. So when I was younger, I actually used to work at a marketing company as well. So some of
Mhm.
that was like fueled into her career. And also it's one of those jobs where like I found it easy to write about because I'd
Yeah.
done it. But yes, I wanted her to be um, a marketing executive that like specifically was trying to advocate for bigger bodies, for the brand in the book to use plus size influencers. And it's kind of reminiscent of things that we have seen online where brands have taken a misstep and they've either said something incredibly fat phobic and they just tend to get away with it. Or, you know, we have brands that once were very fat friendly and very, you know, inclusive and diverse. And then along the way, they have started to go down to a size 6 and stop at a size 14, or their fit doesn't work and all of that, that kind of stuff. And there are a few brands that are like that. And so I was like, you know what? I want to be able to write in this book. You know, we have, and it's a direct response actually to the ways in which brands operate offline. And I've always said that when it comes to inclusivity, when it comes to diversity, especially with fashion, we need to have fat people behind the scenes. We need to have fat people in the room when it comes to making decisions, when it comes to clothing, when it comes to the models that they choose, when it comes to the direction of, I don't know, adverts and creative direction. Because you can't have a plus size brand where behind the scenes it's only slim white women. And there are some brands that are like that. And you see the output, you see the results of when you have brands that are only fronted by slim white women, because we are the ones that are underneath their comments in on Instagram being like, hey, this is rubbish. Hey,
Mhm.
this is fat phobic. Who thought about this? Like, who
Mhm.
decided this? And so with Thames, I wanted her to be very loud and instrumental about the fact that, hey, this brand have messed up catastrophically, and I am going to try and help them, you know, steer them on the right path by doing this. And, you know, if you want to appeal to a larger subsection of people, you have to start using plus sizes and you have to start doing this, that, and the third. So I did want there to be that element of things that we have to deal with, you know, online being consumers, to kind of show up in the book and see, have her be an example of the way in which you can turn a brand around if you just have someone with a lived experience behind it.
I want to take it back a bit to something that you said earlier when you were talking about friendship.
Hmm.
And as much as this is a novel about the complexities of romantic love, it's also about platonic love too. And so I wanted to ask about just the theme of friendship in the book, but then really what role do you think that friendship plays in our journeys towards self-love and authenticity?
So for me, I really wanted Thames to have a solid friendship group. And that stems from my lack of growing up, being plus size, and feeling like I was the only one. I didn't have a solid friendship group at all, because I was bullied and things like that. I kept to myself a lot. And so all of these feelings of low self-confidence and low self-esteem, I went through on my own. I didn't have any friends that could pour into me, or friends that could make me feel like I was enough and that I was valid. And so I wanted to write Jean as Thames's really, really good friend, somebody that
Out to Jean.
shout out to Joy. He's like, I
That's
love
a rider.
him.
That's a
I
form
yeah,
writer.
I loved writing him. And that just came from my desire to have I always wanted a friend like that. I always wanted a friend to kind of like
Mm.
keep me on the right track, to let me know when I was being, you know, when I was being delulu, to let me know like, hey, you are good enough as you are. I always needed, for me, I needed that friend to be able to pour into me. And growing up, I never had that. So when I had the opportunity to write Chaotic Energy, I was like, I want to write a really solid, stable friend that Thames can have a really good time with when they go out, but then also in her low moments to have somebody to check her as well. And I think sort of navigating this plus size field, it's so important to have those platonic friends that can make you feel visible, that can make you feel seen. I feel like we've all had those friendships growing up where you or we are that one friend that's always just like the side character, or
Mm,
we have that one friend in our friendship group that just doesn't understand what it's like to be perceived differently than they are, and they just never really get it. And I wanted to write Jean as someone who gets it, who sees his friend as this beautiful, amazing, successful person, constantly pours into her, constantly reaffirms her as well. And because of his friendship, she really does develop that. I don't know, she develops the security that she needs and the confidence that she needs to be able to do certain things in the book. So as for an any child, their relationship their relationship is very touch and go. But at the end
mm,
of the book, you're able to actually see why they have such a tense relationship. And when you find out sort of specifically in Nenny's reasons, it's almost like a bit like, oh,
yeah.
I didn't think it was going that way, but it does. And sometimes it can, those kinds of interesting relationships where one person might be feeling a pang of jealousy or something towards
Mm,
the other, those type kinds of dynamics do exist when it is, the person might be bigger, or the person might live in a body that is not seen as, preferential. Sometimes they can actually have people that are jealous of them for whatever
mhm,
reason. And so I kind
mhm.
of wanted to write that in there as well.
So speaking of Jean, the
Mm.
first page, Stephanie, the first page, Stephanie. When I read that first page, I said,
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie,
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie.
Yeah, yeah.
And so humor, and specifically your humor, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, is such a strong part of the novel. And there's many moments I laughed and I called upon your name. I said, Stephanie. So how did you like? How was I think just in that? Like, how was it writing this with that voice
Mm.
and like balancing? I think that kind of like the comedy aspect of the romance
Mm-hmm.
you into the novel.
So with that first page, I'm sorry, I did it on purpose because I wanted people to just be like, "Hey, what's going on here?" I wanted chaos to start from page one.
And chaos it did.
It's a very chaotic first page. Yeah, I really wanted to start it off the bat like that. And for me, comedy is such a big part of my life, like on an everyday thing as it is. It is so instrumental to me. Whenever I'm feeling down or depressed, or I'm feeling just not 100%, I always reach for the sitcoms. Like that's the thing that really saves me. And so I feel like my kind of comedy, or my kind of humor, it came a bit more naturally to me, I think, when writing the book, because actually a lot of it comes from my mum. So I find my mum to be she's just your typical Ghanaian mum that's just so, she'll just say things and she doesn't realize how funny or disrespectful she's being. She just says it. And having grown up in that kind of environment where everything is just throwaway quips, I was just like, that's the kind of style of comedy that I wanted. And so even in the book with Temz's mum, it's a bit of my mum in there as well, just especially with the Africanisms and all of that kind of stuff. I really wanted that to kind of come through. And I wanted it to be funny in a way that wasn't at the expense of Thames. So
Yeah.
that was actually quite tricky navigating, because I think, again, when you are a plus size woman in rom-coms or in comedies or in romance, we're always seen as like the funny character or the funny sideline character. And so I didn't want I didn't want her to be a trope in that way. So I did want a lot of the comedy kind of coming from Jean, coming from the mum, coming from her various lovers. And then if there was any humor that was coming from Thames, it was through her voice, it was through her narrative. It wasn't something funny that was happening to her because she was fat. Do you know what I mean? It was coming through her because she's a naturally funny person, and she's not funny because she's fat. She's just funny because she has these funny quips or these funny sentences that she would say. But I wanted to, outside of one scene in the book where I feel like a few of us could relate when it comes to there's a scene where she wanted someone to do something to her and the guy was like nope, and she was like, huh, what in this day and age, you're not doing that. That was that was very fun to write. But I wanted to kind of write that in a way where you weren't laughing because, oh, he didn't want to do this because she was fat, or it was like a fat sex scene or whatever. I didn't want audiences to laugh at her. I wanted them to laugh with her because she just has a funny take on these things. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was kind of, it was very important for me to not write her as a funny fat trope. I just wanted her to naturally be funny, her commenting on other funny things, if that makes sense.
It does, and you can see the care with which that was handled. So
Mm.
thank you.
Thank you.
So, my last question for you, Stephanie.
Mhm.
What do you hope readers take away from chaotic energy, especially Black women like ourselves who don't often get to see ourselves in
Mhm.
love stories?
I really want everybody, and especially Black women, to feel seen and to feel
Mm,
validated in this book, and to know that we can exist in a place where we can and are allowed to have softness. And even if we do mess up at times, or we do an action that may not have been the most appropriate, that there is a way to remedy that if you are intentional about wanting to make peace with that part of yourself that is still unhealed. Um, and I want us to know that we are capable of love, and that we can show up as we are. We don't have to change anything about ourselves in order to find love, in order to be desired, in order to take up space in the world. We don't have to catfish. We don't have to do all of the things that sort of Thames does. And I think in the book, Thames is also a little bit of a control freak. She's very, I think maybe because of her work and just the way she lives her life, she's very regimented. And one thing that we can't have control over is the ways in which people react to
mm,
us, the ways in
mhm.
which people love us, the ways in which people desire us. We can't control that. And Thames tries to control that through catfishing and curating certain images or videos of herself because she's trying to get this person to like her, to desire her. And that's one thing I think in real life we can't do without it, going terribly. And the best that we can do is just show up authentically as ourselves, and hoping that someone will see us for the amazing women that we are. And that includes us. It's not despite, it includes us being fat, it includes us being Black, and having all of these amazing attributes that we have. People out there do, there are people out there that like that love that, and we don't have to change who we are for anybody.
We don't have to change who we are for anybody.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It really was a joy. As always,
thank
chaotic
you.
energy out now. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for attending this Fane online event.
Thank you so much, guys.